Welcome back to Conflicts of Interest. This is episode 772, and today is March 20th, 2025. I'm the host of the show, Kyle Anzalone. So, this is a makeup episode from Wednesday's show. I was just not feeling very well yesterday morning. Didn't want to put out a show that wasn't up to my current standards, so I held off a day. I will have another new show out tomorrow because we have a ton of news to catch up on from this week. So I want to jump right into it. Just remind people that you can support all my work by making a donation to the Libertarian Institute. We have our 2025 fundraiser going on. We have $25,000 in matching funds. So we're doing very well. We just need a few more, just everyday donors to come in, give us $25, $50, $100 to help us get us over the goal line at this point. We really appreciate everybody who donates, and we offer some great gifts to our contributors. And if you can't make a contribution or you already have, you can always just share this show or any of my work that's published at the Institute. YouTube, Rumble, and Odysee. You could subscribe to the video version of the show. It's up anywhere you could listen to podcasts. And then on Twitter at @KyleLansLone_, I post everything that I do for the Institute. All right, everyone, let's get into the news today. The first story up here I wrote for the Institute on March 18th, U.S. military to test Ukrainian drones. So the Pentagon has awarded 2 Ukrainian companies that produce long-range drones, offering to test their products as a part of a new long-term development project. Western officials have suggested that the Ukrainian war presents opportunities to battle test NATO weapon systems against Russian forces. So on Friday, the U.S. Defense Innovation Unit, or the DIU, announced deals with 4 firms to produce one-way, long-range drones to be tested by the U.S. military. 2 of the contracts went to unnamed Ukrainian companies that manufacture unmanned aerial vehicles. According to a DIU press release, the program, dubbed Project Artemis, seeks to produce ground-launched, affordable, one-way UAS unmanned aerial aircraft systems, platforms that could operate at a range of 50 to 300 kilometers, launch quickly and expeditiously, navigate at low altitudes, carry a variety of payloads, are rapidly upgradable and updatable, and function in a disruptible, disconnected, intermediate, low bandwidth global navigation system denied environments. And a separate part of the press release did mention that they want them to be able to be loitering munitions as well. And so we're one day away. A TAD drone is kind of what you probably think about, where you launch the drone, it flies to its target, and it hits it. These loitering munitions will go, they'll hang up in the air, and then if an identifiable target comes by, it will attack it. I do think they are working on AI systems, so these drones will just effectively rain down on people. The 2 Ukrainian firms. The involvement of 2 Ukrainian firms comes after Kiev increased long-range drone strikes on Russian territory. Last week, its forces targeted Russia with more than 300 drones, the largest such attack of the conflict, which began in 2022. Washington and its NATO allies have viewed Ukraine as an opportunity to battlefield test its weapons and warfighting strategies against Russia. In 2023, a Western official explained to CNN that Ukraine was absolutely a weapons lab in every sense because none of this equipment has ever actually been used in war between 2 industrialized developed nations. This is real-world battle testing. In many cases, Kiev has been the first nation to use Western arms against Russia in modern warfare and has leveraged that position to sell NATO members on continuing to supply weapons to Ukraine. The country's defense minister at the time, Odysee Rizkov, explained to the Financial Times in 2023 that Kiev's Western allies can actually see if their weapons work, how effectively they work, and if they need to be upgraded. For the military industry of this world, you can have a better testing ground, he added. And so, this is the mindset of Western officials always, that Ukraine was going to be used to develop weapons for them. And it seems that these drones are some of the early systems that we're seeing that be the case for. All right, next up here, we need to talk about what is happening with the ceasefire going on in Ukraine. So, of course, over the past couple of weeks, just to recap, U.S. officials, Secretary of State Marco Rubio and National Security Advisor Mike Waltz went to Saudi Arabia, met with Ukrainian officials, and then announced a 30-day ceasefire, saying that the ball was now in Putin's court, that Russia had to accept that ceasefire deal. Now, after that, Russia was then put in a position where they would have to accept a ceasefire, but tactically it wouldn't benefit Russia as much as Ukraine to accept the ceasefire. Russian forces are on the march, and a ceasefire would give Ukraine time to rearm. And so rather than accepting the ceasefire, Putin said that he accepts the idea of a ceasefire, but the details needed to be hammered out. And so then we had a call earlier this week between Trump and Putin, and the two discussed, and it was reported agreed to a ceasefire only involving energy infrastructure in each other's countries. And then there were questions about if there's ongoing attacks that are either in violation of that ceasefire or when the ceasefire is supposed to begin. So now we had this article from Dave DeCamp at antiwar.com, March 19th. Zelensky tells Trump he supports halting attacks on energy infrastructure. So Ukrainian President Zelensky told President Trump in a phone call on Wednesday that he supports the proposal for Russia and Ukraine to halt attacks on energy infrastructure as a first step towards a ceasefire and lasting peace deal. Zelensky's office said in a readout of the call, ending strikes on energy and other civilian infrastructure could be the first step towards fully ending the war and ensuring security. Zelensky supported this step, and Ukraine confirms its readiness to implement it. Russian President Vladimir Putin agreed to the infrastructure ceasefire in a call with Trump on Tuesday. Ukraine and Russia traded accusations of attacks on energy infrastructure on Wednesday, but it's unclear if the partial ceasefire has formally started. And this is something that it's kind of counterintuitive to what I think people would expect, where let's say two sides agree to a ceasefire and it's Wednesday, or, today it's Thursday as we're recording, and we agree that the ceasefire will take effect Sunday morning at 9 a.m. Well, rather than this being, okay, the ceasefire is going to take effect, there's no reason to continue killing over the next couple of days. Actually, the opposite tends to happen, where you've generated lists of targets, right? You have different weapon systems and logistical positions, right? You don't have too many arms on the front lines because then they're vulnerable to attack. And so, you keep a minimum number, but enough. And so actually you're going to have like all of your frontline forces burn through the munitions that they have there, because you're about to have a period where you could bring new munitions forward to the lines. Additionally, any targets that you have generated through intelligence, you're going to want to hit before the ceasefire, because things could be moved or reinforced during the ceasefire. And also you had that period to generate new lists of targets. And so what tends to happen is when a ceasefire is agreed to that's going to take place in the future, between the announcement of the ceasefire and the start of the ceasefire, you actually end up with significantly more fighting, not less fighting, which is awful, right? That this is the way it works out. It's just, this is what happens. So in a statement on the call, Rubio and Waltz said that Trump had agreed to help Ukraine procure more air defenses. President Zelensky asked for additional air defense systems to protect his civilians, particularly Patriot missile systems. President Trump agreed to work with him to find what was available, particularly in Europe. The U.S. and Ukraine proposed a full ceasefire for 30 days, but Putin had several conditions, including guarantees that the U.S. would stop military supplies and equipment shipments to Ukraine. The U.S. statement on the Trump-Zelensky call also said that President Trump proposed the idea of the U.S. taking ownership of Ukrainian energy infrastructure, similar to how he wants the U.S. to have a piece of Ukrainians' rare earth minerals and other natural resources. And so the idea is that if we own it, then Russia won't be bold enough to attack it. So Walt said on Wednesday that he spoke with an aide of Putin and agreed that the U.S. and Russian officials would meet in Saudi Arabia in the coming days. We agreed our technical teams would meet in Riyadh in the coming days to focus on implementing and expanding the partial ceasefire President Trump secured from Russia. And so my guess is that the ceasefire hasn't actually started yet, and that we have to hope that over the next few days there's not so many attacks that it makes actually implementing the ceasefire impossible, because that's something that happens as well, that if Ukraine, say, doesn't actually want this ceasefire to take place, they may launch a fairly significant attack on Russian energy infrastructure, which will, of course, be retaliated by Moscow with a large attack on Ukrainian infrastructure. And then, voices in the United States, the John Boltons, the Jay Tappers, all these types will cry and complain and moan that, oh no, Putin is so mean and he's taking advantage of Donald Trump and the ceasefire. And they're going to try to paint Trump in a corner where he can't actually implement the ceasefire. So next up here, Taiwan military touts U.S. ties and security review. I wrote this one for the Institute on March 18th. So in a regular review of Taipei's military policy, the country's defense ministry concluded that Taiwan should maintain strong security ties with the United States. The Taiwanese official who authored the document said the partnership with Washington was needed in an increasingly unstable world. So the Quadrennial Defense Review, a military report produced after each new leader takes office, argued that the U.S. remains a crucial strategic partner working closely with us on military cooperation and helping to boost our self-defense capabilities. The authors added that Taiwan's ties to the U.S., along with several other steps, were needed as the current international strategic environment's main characteristics are the continuation of the U.S.-China competition and the simultaneous existence of several regional conflicts presenting relative complexity and uncertainty. The QDR called on Taiwan's president Lai Ching-te William Lai to promote military exchanges with the U.S., deepening bilateral cooperation in areas such as policy dialogue with U.S. visits, intelligence sharing, operational topic discussions, joint military exercises, military research and development, and the defense industry. So the Wall Street Journal noted that the 2025 QDR placed far more emphasis on Taipei's relationship with Washington than previous versions of the report. A defense expert who teaches at Tamkang University in Taiwan told the outlet that this marks a significant change. The new material in Tuesday's report could mean exchanges with the U.S. is an essential area we're going to keep strengthening in the future. The QDR is not just for Taiwanese people, but it's also meant to be read by the outside world about how much the Taiwan-U.S. cooperation is deepening. So the steps to deepen ties with the U.S. are likely to upset China, as Beijing views Taiwan as a breakaway region and part of its own sovereign territory. In recent years, the People's Republic has complained about the U.S. military aid and high-level delegations sent to the island. Beijing argues that such acts violate the One China policy that was established in the 1972 joint communique between the U.S. and China. That policy called on Washington to retain a position of strategic ambiguity towards Taiwan, meaning the U.S. would not commit to the island's defense nor treat Taipei as an independent country, but without effectively announcing that stance. Starting with Barack Obama, American presidents have moved away from the policy of ambiguity and have clarified that the U.S. would in fact defend Taiwan, all the while providing Taipei with military aid. And so if we continue to move in this direction that Taiwan now says they want to go in, I think it's going to significantly ramp up the tensions in the Taiwan Strait and in the waters around Taiwan, which could lead to a conflict between the U.S. and China. So next up here, this one I wrote for the Institute on March 17th. Israeli lawmakers say Hamas gaining strength despite war. So a group of Israeli Knesset members claimed that Hamas and the Palestinian Islamic Jihad have now returned to their pre-October 7th strength, suggesting that the brutal Gaza war has done little to reduce their numbers. National Unity member of the Knesset, Gadi Eisenkot, a retired general and former IDF chief of staff, spearheaded a letter by opposition lawmakers discussing the number of fighters in the Palestinian armed groups. The letter said, "In recent days, we have informed that the military strength of Hamas and Islamic Jihad has been restored, such that Hamas has over 25,000 fighters and Islamic Jihad has over 5,000 armed terrorists." And that's, the statement from the group. The lawmaker slammed Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu for failing to secure Israel and demand that he appear before the committee for a debate. They added, "In the past month, the Israeli government has not fulfilled its responsibility as supreme commander of the IDF, and it's not advancing the war goals of returning the kidnapped and destroying Hamas's military and governmental powers." The estimates match one produced by U.S. officials at the end of the Joe Biden presidency. In January, then Secretary of State Antony Blinken said the U.S. assessed that Hamas has recruited almost as many new militants as it has lost, and that is a recipe for an enduring insurgency and perpetual war. So Netanyahu has said the elimination of Hamas is one of Israel's primary goals in the Gaza onslaught. Over the past 17 months, Israel has killed tens of thousands of civilians and destroyed much of the Strip, but appears no closer to achieving that objective. Fighting between the IDF and Hamas was largely ground to a halt in recent weeks, thanks to hostage and exchange and a ceasefire talks. But of course, that is now over, which we will get into with this next story that Dave DeCamp wrote March 19th, antiwar.com. Israeli defense minister threatens residents of Gaza with utter destruction and devastation. So, Israeli Defense Minister Israel Katz issued a direct threat to the civilian population of Gaza on Wednesday, telling the residents of Gaza to expel Hamas and free Israeli hostages or face utter destruction and devastation. Katz warned that the attacks on Gaza will get much worse than the bombardment Israel unleashed on Tuesday morning, which killed 436 Palestinians, including 138 children. Residents of Gaza, this is your last warning. The first Sinwar ruined Gaza, and the second Sinwar will destroy it completely. The Air Force attack against Hamas terrorists was only the first step. The rest will be significantly worse, and you will pay the price. And I mean, killing almost half children, how much worse could you possibly get? But these people are absolute monsters. So the Israeli minister said that soon forced evacuations from combat zones will resume. Unless the Israeli hostages are released and Hamas is expelled from Gaza, Israel will act with force never before seen, he explained. Kaz said that the people of Gaza should take the advice of President Trump and return the hostages and expel Hamas. He appeared to be referencing Trump's threat to the people of Gaza that they would be dead if the hostages weren't released. Israel and Hamas reached an agreement in January that would have led to the release of all Israeli hostages and a permanent ceasefire and the Israeli withdrawal from Gaza. But Israel abandoned the deal and has been emboldened by President Trump's repeated calls for Palestinians to be permanently removed from the Strip. Katz said in a statement that if the hostages are freed and Hamas is expelled, other options would be open to the Palestinians of Gaza, including relocating to other places in the world to those who wish. And so it's absolutely unbelievable. He's saying if you give up, if you expel Hamas and return the hostages, we're just going to ethnically cleanse you, right? We're going to drive you off. You could go live somewhere else. We will allow you to leave your homeland. But if you stay, we will kill you all. I mean, that's absolutely disturbing. So next up here, I want to talk about Israeli Finance Minister Bezalel Smotrich says Israel has been planning resumption of Gaza slaughter since the new IDF chief took over. And the reason this is important, of course, is because Hamas is currently being blamed for the breakdown of the ceasefire. The Israelis say, oh, Hamas didn't participate in the ceasefire negotiations, and it's Hamas's fault that we haven't reached a deal yet. But as Smotrich says, Israel never intended to return to the deal. This is why he wrote on X. As we promised and explained, the IDF returned tonight to a powerful attack in Gaza with the goal of destroying Hamas, returning all the hostages, and removing the threat posed by the Gaza Strip to the Israeli citizens, thereby restoring security to all residents of Israel's encirclement and Israeli civilians over time. This is a gradual process that we have built and planned in recent weeks since the new chief of staff took office. I think that was on March 6th. And with God's help, it will look completely different from what has been done so far. So this, again, is important. It just admits who actually broke the ceasefire, and it was Gaza, it was Israel, it was not Hamas. So Trump gave Israel the green light to restart large-scale bombings in Gaza, and this is according to a report from the Wall Street Journal. President Trump gave Israel the green light to restart its genocidal war on Gaza by launching massive airstrikes on the besieged territory, which killed at least 404 Palestinians, including scores of women and children. The report, which cited an Israeli official, said Trump was given a heads up before the Israeli began launching the airstrikes. White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt confirmed that the Israel consulted with Trump before launching the bombing and repeated that the president will threat of all hell would break loose. And so this is 100% backed by the U.S., which of course were the ones who facilitated the deal between Hamas and Israel. And it just goes to show how untrustworthy of a negotiating partner that the U.S. is. Next up here, in threat to Hamas, U.S. envoy says, look what happened to the Houthis. So on Sunday, White House envoy Steve Witkoff appeared to threaten Hamas with potential U.S. military action, warning the Palestinian group to look at what the U.S. has done to the Houthis in Yemen, which is, of course, where we're going next on the show, talking about the situation in Yemen, where the U.S. is conducting some pretty horrific bombing campaigns. Let's talk about that. So, of course, over the weekend, as we talked about on Monday's show, the U.S. had carried out a pretty significant airstrike in Yemen, killing, I think, over 50 people, several women and children. Monday, the Yemenis come out and respond with massive rallies in the streets. I mean, you could see all these people here. Of course, the Houthis maintain a lot of control, and they are not benevolent people in any means. And so the fact that there's large scale protests could in part just be something that happens because of the Houthi control. But I think it also does reflect that the people of Yemen do want to stand up for the Palestinians, and they're willing to be on the receiving end of U.S. airstrikes and fight this war. Now, Trump says the U.S. will hold Iran accountable for Houthi attacks, and the concern here is that this means that the U.S. attacks that are currently on Yemen could eventually be directed at Iran, which would be a major escalation and a major problem. And the Houthis, despite the U.S. conducting more and more airstrikes on Yemen, are firing back and apparently fired a missile at southern Israel over the slaughter in Gaza. And so if this continues, I think we could really see some fighting heat up, at least in Yemen. I'm hesitant to think that Trump and Netanyahu really do want a war with Iran. I mean, at this point, if you look at the situation in the Middle East, for years we heard that Iran was the backstop. Iran would prevent Hezbollah's defeat in southern Lebanon, would prevent Assad's downfall in Syria. And yet both of those things happen. I mean, we now have jihadists, right, who, along with hating America, in that we should be concerned about in the U.S., they also hate the Iranians. And Syria is much closer to Iran than it is the U.S. And so, looking at the situation in the Middle East, the geopolitics have not gone in Iran's favor over the past year or so. And the idea that Iran is backing the Houthis to this great degree and that we need to go to war with Iran to rein in the Houthis, I think would be a huge mistake. And when Iran has been relatively willing to take loss after loss after loss on the chin, directly attacking Iran may be what finally breaks the dam and causes Iran to go and try to make a nuclear weapon. And then they would be a real geopolitical force in the Middle East. And so this if I were Netanyahu, right, like this is just me being absolutely cruel and calculating and trying to think of what I could do to achieve Netanyahu's top goals, which appears to be the expulsion of all Palestinians from the territory that Israel wants, which includes the West Bank and Gaza. I wouldn't go pick a fight with Iran at this point. I think we have seen that Israel could do what they want to the Palestinians, and Iran isn't going to step up and it's not going to interfere in any more than like kind of token ways. And so if you have Iran that isn't stepping up, that isn't fighting against you as you do this, then why would you go and start another war with the Iranians when you've already kind of had them beaten into submission in a way? And so I think what Israel would want is maybe to, constantly agitate about war with Iran, to keep that on the table, to keep the sabers rattled, to keep everybody's eyes and distraction over on Iran. But to actually fight a war with Iran at this point seems somewhat counterproductive to Israel's ultimate goals. So I don't actually think that we're going to see a war between Iran and the US or Iran and Israel at this point. I think Israel is maybe very happy that the US is going to be conducting large-scale airstrikes in Yemen, but I'm not quite sure Trump is ready to go to Iran. So there's a lot going on involving Syria. And one of the things that was really interesting, and this is something that I believe I had talked about on the show about a month or so ago when Israel really started to take a lot of territory in southern Syria, the possibility that Israel could send the Palestinians from Gaza to Syria. And now this is, according to Dave DeCamp's story here at antiwar.com, something being discussed. So this is a report from CBS News. The U.S. and Israel are considering expelling Gaza's Palestinian population to Syria to facilitate the ethnic cleansing of the territory. The report said the U.S. and Israel were interested in sending Palestinians to Somalia, Sudan, or Somaliland, which has previously been reported. And as we discussed on the last episode of the show last year, they were discussing Chad or Rwanda as possible destinations for the Palestinians. A source told CBS that the Trump administration has attempted to reach out to Syria's interim government, which is led by the Al-Qaeda offshoot Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, about the idea of resettling Palestinians in Syria through a third party. And I think one of the real issues here isn't just moving the Palestinians out of Gaza, but from the American perspective, we cannot be dealing with the Syrian government led by al-Jolani. This man is a terrorist, and endorsing and embracing this government is going to make the world less safe for Americans. Now, there's some fighting that was broken out in, I think, northern Lebanon and also Syria over the border there between Hayat Tahrir al-Sham and I believe it was HTS that actually had a brief incursion into Lebanon in early February, and now there's renewed fighting in the exact same area as HTS shelled a village on the Lebanese side of the border. The new fighting centers around the death of HTS members on Saturday. They were allegedly kidnapped by Hezbollah and brought to the Lebanese village and then executed. Hezbollah has denied involvement, and there are alternative allegations that claim involvement in the early February fighting may have been the ones who did it, which would make some sense if it was actors other than Hezbollah. It could be Hezbollah, but it could also be some of the Syrians or others who are people, who are being horrible atrocities that HTS is committing against them. And so there are a lot of people who would maybe want to take and execute some members of HTS. So the shelling of the Lebanese village caused damage, and a number of villagers had to flee from the border towards a larger town further away from the border. The Lebanese army reported they returned fire against the Syrian forces, and both sides are sending reinforcements to the area. Now, an update on that, it doesn't appear to be going well. Ceasefire in doubts as Syrian troops occupy Lebanese border village and are burning homes. So Jason says that yesterday's clashes at the border between the Lebanese army and HTS forces seemingly ended with a ceasefire overnight. 8 Syrian soldiers were killed in the Monday fighting, along with 5. Some unconfirmed reports say 7 of soldiers killed on the Lebanese side. A Lebanese boy was reported killed and scores were wounded on the Lebanese side. The expectation that the situation will be calming down somewhat, but it didn't last. HTS fighters are once again invading Lebanon overnight, and at 2 a.m. they had gone 5 kilometers deep, occupying a Lebanese border village. So neither HTS nor the Syrian state media have indicated why they invaded again or so soon after the ceasefire started, which said that both defense ministers could consult before they move along the border. Lebanon's army is sending a growing number of reinforcements to the area all throughout the border area, unsure of what is to come. So this could end up being significant fighting. Again, these HTS forces are jihadist lunatics, so who knows what they're going to do. All right, everybody, that will do it for the show today. Again, we'll be back with another show tomorrow, getting into some of the other big stories of the week. Also, if you're not already, go subscribe to the Kyle Anzalone Show. Yesterday, I interviewed Joe Terwilliger, who is a Columbia University professor, and he's also somebody who taught at a university in North Korea, was Dennis Rodman's translator when he met with Kim Jong-un several times, so he actually knows Kim, has had several conversations with Kim, and is just a very, very interesting guy. We had a really interesting conversation about North Korea, about the protests at Columbia University and Trump's crackdown on them. So definitely subscribe to that channel and check that out if you haven't already. Thanks, everyone, and we'll be back with another show tomorrow.